The fair go. Going, gone. That. Look what we have here. That is the name of the report from the IPA, the Institute of Public Affairs. The fair go. Going, gone. The decline of the Australian way of life, 2000 to 2020. The IPA, which is the right-wing think tank, basically the intellectual powerhouse of the Liberal Party, of the coalition indeed, has come up with this little beauty, the fair go. And they contend, their rigorous analysis contends, that the Australian way of life has declined by about 30%. And they do this via a number of very important metrics. Things like home ownership, housing affordability, underutilisation in the workforce, trust in government, welfare dependence, government debt. We'll get to that in a moment. Tony Abbott, former Prime Minister Tony Abbott, has just joined the IPA as a distinguished fellow. He has been tasked with advancing this report, the fair go, and returning Australia to the values of fairness of the fair go. He is leading the charge. He is at the vanguard of this movement. Key findings. The quality of the Australian way of life is collapsing. The Australian way of life scoreboard, which measures the quality of the Australian way of life, has declined by 28.5% since 2000. In fact, the coalition government has been in government for most of that time, since 2000. For 15 years, 3/4 of the time, their policies have been behind this collapse in the Australian way of life, but it doesn't seem that it seems that this irony has been lost on the research team at the IPA. Ever since the gold rush of the 1850s, Australia has been an extraordinarily prosperous and peaceful country. Now, I'm not sure what literacy and life expectancy and general standards of education and social welfare and health and so on were back in the gold rush in 1850, but I think we're probably a little bit better off than we were then, or the average Australian. Here we are. The AWL scoreboard. That's the Australian Way of Life scoreboard. Let's start with one. Home ownership. There's been a collapse in home ownership, like all the other collapsing metrics. It doesn't appear, though, that the IPA has paid regard to the fact that home ownership is a struggle, particularly for young Australians, because of negative gearing, tax breaks that favour the rich people that have already got properties. Negative gearing, AML, capital gains tax, all coalition policies or refusal to implement policies. Labor can bear some of the blame, but they were only in power for 5 of these years. Let's have a look at some of the others. Commute time. People spending more time in their car commuting. Public transport has been woefully underfunded, and governments of both stripes have favoured cars, road transport, and they've privatised the toll roads. Here is an absolute cracker. Underutilisation. Underutilisation is less hours being worked in the workplace, basically. This is an absolutely direct result of workplace policy by the government, dismantling EBAs, dismantling the workplace arrangements that have stood for many years, busting the unions, promoting the gig economy, doing little to restrain the multinational players such as Uber and so on, providing no protections against their advances into the fabric of our society. There it is. Underutilisation is a massive problem, according to the IPA. Yes, it is. And it is the direct result of government policies. Youth idleness is one. Well, I'm sure that that's been a common complaint for the last 2,000 years. Even Horace, back in the Roman days, used to complain about how useless young people were. What else have we got? Prime age men in full-time work. That's collapsed too as a metric. course, where are the women? Are women meant to be part of this working equation or what? It says nothing about them. Government debt. Now, I think this is the most majestic paradox in this whole thing, that they're blaming government debt. The Liberal Party think tank is blaming government debt as one of the things which have led to the collapsing lifestyle of all Australians. The Australian way of life scoreboard. Debt. Government debt. Government debt. In the first 2 or 3 years of this government, they put on more government debt than in the decades since Federation. You had all the years since Federation, Abbott, Turnbull, Morrison get in the government, they double government debt within 3 years. That is spectacular. Despite the IPA and the coalition having this great protestation that government should not interfere in the market, that free enterprise and capitalism should be allowed to flourish, the laissez-faire, the principles of laissez-faire capitalism. The fact is that last year was an absolute orgy of corporate welfare, of spending by governments on companies. Solomon Lew, 40 or 50 million the retailers' companies got, Premier Investments, he took home, his company, a $20 million dividend. Record sales, record profits, record government grants straight to large corporations. Mirvac, Lend-Lease, Nine Network. Do we hear Rupert Murdoch's News Corporation? Were they also on JobKeeper? We've asked them. They refused to tell us. Government debt. So what we have here is a report by the Liberal Party think tank, the IPA, which is also, despite it getting money from large mining companies, multinational oil and gas companies, and the well-publicised millions a year from Gina Rinehart's iron ore play, which is Hancock Prospecting, millions a year in funding, purporting to back ordinary Australians. Really, the policies of the government that they have backed and the government which has backed them as their think tank have led to rampant inequality, which has just got sharply worse with COVID-19 last year. And young Australians do face a very bleak future unless there is something in the way of policy to reverse this inequality. Because at the moment, these people aren't acting for small businesses and the ordinary Australian punter. They are acting as proxies for big business. They have charity status. They enjoy charity status. Their $3 or $4 million in the bank, sitting there in cash, has been gifted them because they get charity status and they promote what large vested interests want to hear. I think it's time the government had a good look at who gets charity status.